Hello, my name's Gavin and this is Genre Books, and today is the Horror Mayhem tag. Now this is quite an old tag, I believe, created by Booktube, and I was tagged last week by Pat from Book Chat with Pat. There are 12 prompts, so let's get to it. Prompt number 1, how and when did you first get into horror? I was dragged unwillingly into horror to begin with. When I was 7 years old, we moved country, and not too many weeks after our arrival we met up with some extended family for a barbecue. I believe these were my second or third cousins, and whilst the adults were socialising, I was taken by the children to go and play, and by play they meant sit me down in front of the film Poltergeist. I was possibly a little too young for the film Poltergeist, and it properly traumatised me for a few weeks, not least because we're in completely unfamiliar surroundings. We are in a new house where everything is unfamiliar, and I don't know if I'm getting the timings right, but it wasn't too long after we moved into the house that we had a swimming pool made, which meant they were digging up the front garden and putting a swimming pool in, and if you've seen Poltergeist you know that's a bad idea too. So yes, that was my baptism into the world of horror. Prompt number 2, what was the first horror book you read? I think that is The Rats by James Herbert. I think that is the first James Herbert's book I read. It may have been The Survivor, but I'm pretty sure it was The Rats. This would have been at the age of, I'm guessing 13, possibly 14. Horror was just the thing to get into. James Herbert was the number one choice at the time in the UK. Stephen King, perennially popular, would have been the second choice. And I remember reading, I think early Stephen King I read was probably Christine. Not that I was overly taken with that book. If you could get away with reading it at that age, some Clive Barker. Question number 3, what horror related goodness can we expect from your channel? Well, I like the older sort of horror. I'm not averse to reading anything new as such, but I'm just drawn to the old gothic horror stories and looking at books that are unfamiliar to me. I think what you can expect is that I'll be looking at something that I've not looked at before. So for Horror Mayhem in this last month, I've started reading E.F. Benson ghost stories, which I'd not read before, and I read The Amber Witch, or Mary Schweidler, The Amber Witch by William Meinhold, both of which I'll link the videos to. But for future horror offerings, I am taken with the idea of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, which was an occult group in the UK at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, who included a number of writers amongst their members. Briefly, Conan Doyle, possibly Edith Nesbit, possibly Bram Stoker, but definitely Algernon Blackwood, W.B. Yeats, and Arnold Bennett. I'd like to know more about the group and how it influenced their writings, or how their writings influenced the group. I don't know yet. I'll find out and get back to you. Another thing I would like to do is read some of the old penny dreadfuls. So I've not yet read Varney the Vampire, or Wagner the Werewolf, or Mysteries of London. I've not read the books from the Minerva Press, which was a very old publishing house making putting out gothic horror novels. I would like to read the horrible novels cited by Jane Austen in Northanger Abbey. 7 horror books, or gothic horror related books. So there's plenty of old stuff there to cover in the future before I have to think about any modern horror. Prompt number 4. Do you have any favourite horror theme or subgenre? I think probably at the moment my favourite is just the old classic ghost story. And there's a lot more of those that I haven't read that I need to get to. But reading the E.F. Benson stories this month, and reading a couple of volumes of Christmas themed ghost stories back last December, really sort of reminded me of, you know, how good the Victorian and Edwardian ghost stories can be. So that's my favourite currently. Prompt number 5. Name an underrated horror novel or author. Well, I'm going to go for a writer, and that is Frederick Brown, who I think one of those writers that gets underrated in a lot of things because they wrote in a lot of different genres and isn't therefore necessarily pigeonholed as exactly one thing. So he wrote science fiction, but he also wrote horror. And recently I read his collection, Nightmares in Gießen Stacks, which was great. And I don't hear him spoken of often enough. So yes, I would definitely say he's underrated. Prompt number 6. Name an overrated horror novel or writer. I've been disappointed by horror books before, but everyone can have an off day. There are some horror authors who are so prodigious in their output that if you liked everything that they wrote, you would probably be quite uncritical. But you might really like the next thing that comes along. So yes, let's not trash anybody. Prompt number 7. Recommend 3 of your favourite horror novels. I would really want to recommend H.P. Lovecraft. I think it would be too much to recommend the entire Cthulhu mythos, so if we choose one of the longer pieces, we'll make that count as a novel, and I'll say At the Mountains of Madness. James Herbert, let's put some James Herbert in there. I think The Fog is one that really got me when I was a teenager. So yes, The Fog by James Herbert. And a book that I read either this year or the back end of last year and very much enjoyed was Song of Kali by Dan Simmons, which was a fish out of water horror where a writer, it's often a writer, finds himself embroiled in horrific conspiracy on a visit to India. Prompt number 8. Recommend a book to someone who is new to the horror genre. Well, I'm going to go back to the Victorian and Edwardian ghost story again. Let's ease people in gently. These are well written, mannered, brief, but profoundly spooky pieces, and I will say E.F. Benson, just because he's uppermost in my mind at the moment. Prompt number 9. Are there any book to film adaptations that you particularly loved or hated? In the last week we lost Roger Corman, who I believe was 98, so it wasn't a shock, but it was still a loss. The amount of films that guy put out on a shoestring budget is phenomenal, and picking one film of his, it's a horror adaptation, and I say adaptation in the very loosest sense of the word, is The Raven. It's been many years since I've seen the film, but I'm pretty sure that the film has absolutely nothing to do with the poem. It is a magical battle between Vincent Price and Bela Lugosi. So it ticks all of the horror right there. Edgar Allan Poe and two of the classic horror actors of the 20th century. And it throws into that mix Peter Lorre and a young Jack Nicholson. It's in glorious Technicolor and it's completely mad. So yeah, I'll go for that. Prompt number 10. How do you discover new or new to you horror books? There's a few ways. Booktube, I'd say first and foremost, alerts me to stuff that I've certainly not read before, and that sets me off on my way trying to find stuff of my own to do videos about. All it usually takes is watching someone's video and then maybe looking on Gutenberg and falling down a Wikipedia rabbit hole to find something of interest. Recently, looking at a 100-year-old issue of Weird Tales threw up many new, to me, horror writers, and also the crazy idea that Harry Houdini was a horror writer when it was obviously H.P. Lovecraft doing the actual writing. So there are vast resources on the internet to dig up very old pieces of sort of pulp literature history. There's also a series of books that are constantly being released by the British Library. This is the E.F. Benson that I got last month. A couple of these tales had not been in print since they were first in print at the beginning of the last century, and the editors of these anthologies obviously have the best resource in the world to rely upon to put these anthologies together. One which I've also started this horror mayhem is Promethean Horrors. So this is where this is a theme rather than a writer, and has some famous and not very famous stories cheek by jowl. Prompt number 11. What was the last horror book you bought? That was just a couple of weeks ago. I don't often buy ebooks, but there is one that I had been after for some time that was on offer for 99 pence. So I bought Swan Song by Robert McCammon. Now this is a post-apocalyptic horror behemoth of a book. I think it's probably around the same size as The Stand by Stephen King, but obviously not that heavy once you have it on a Kindle. Prompt number 12. What horror book is at the top of your wish list? I'm going to allow myself two here, because one is a single volume and one is a collection. The collection are those horrible novels. I don't think anyone has made a box set of those novels mentioned in Northanger Abbey since the Folio Society did a collection 30 odd years ago. For a single volume of horror, I would say H.P. Lovecraft again, and The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, the Ballantine adult fantasy. volume. I am conscious that we are at the end now of Horror Mayhem, but I will see if there's anyone who's not done this tag and tag them to do so. But I appreciate that we are nearly in June, so they may not wish to do it at this stage. But thank you to Booktube for creating the tag, thank you to Pat for tagging me, and thank you to you for listening to me ramble on. And until next time, bye.